I had this little Bachmann freight car frame laying around. A normal person might look at this and consider it a spare part in case of emergency, or maybe consider looking for some parts to build a standard Bachmann freight car on top of it. I'm not normal, though I'm sure many of you knew that already. I took one look at this thing and thought it would be fun to build a custom gondola out of wood on top of it. Well, okay, I was gonna make a custom flat car at first, actually, but after asking what my Ko-Fi supporters wanted to see more, they said a low-side gondola, so here we are. My father brought home a few pieces of 16th by quarter-inch strips of wood for me to use for this project. Since a quarter of an inch is 1 foot in scale, this translates to roughly 3 by 12 inches. The width of the car frame was around 1 and 5/8 inches, aka 6.5 feet, so to give myself room to add wood sides around the frame, I started cutting individual boards for the floor of the car at around 1 3/4 inches long, or 7 feet. I cut 30 pieces total, 25 for the floor, 4 for the gondola end walls, and 1 extra because I accidentally damaged one of the boards I had originally cut. Funnily enough, I wound up losing one of the other 29 boards, so I wound up using the damaged one in the final product. For the car sides, I cut 2 pieces at 6 1/4 inches, or 25 feet, and for the gondola sides, I cut them at 5 inches flat, or 20 feet. With the pieces already ready to go, it was time to start gluing and painting. For the floor, I decided it would be easier to paint after it had been all glued together. However, instead of gluing every board to each other in one go, I split it into 5 groups of 5 boards, which I would later glue together into one long piece once the first rounds of glue had dried. While waiting, I decided to paint up the sides and gondola walls. I went with Model Flex Dark Tuscan Oxide Red as my color of choice. For the siding, I painted 3 of the edges and only 1 of the sides. One of the longer edges would be glued to the base of the car, while one of the 2 sides would be very difficult to see since it was up against the car frame, so no reason to paint either one of them up when they would be extremely difficult to see. With the gondola walls, I painted both sides and 3 of 4 edges. This time, both sides of the walls would be easily visible from a regular viewing angle, but the bottom edge of the walls would be difficult to make out, so there was less need to paint them, especially with my confidence in how I lined up the boards. The missing paint would be covered up. At some point during all this painting, though, I knocked over my paint bottle, spilling a lot of paint everywhere. Fortunately, it was easy enough to clean up, and the paint isn't too expensive, but I really should have been more careful around the open bottle. Once the floor had been all glued together, I gave it a coat of Americana Territorial Beige. It's a nice tan that helps to make the wood deck feel more weathered, while still maintaining a wooden color. The paint didn't take long to dry, so I soon got back to work and started gluing the car sides to the bottom and the gondola walls to each other. The walls were a little bit tricky, since there wasn't much space to attach them to each other, so at first I used a metal box to try and align the pieces as they dried, but soon found that they somehow stayed upright if you were very careful and put a little more glue than necessary on them. Soon enough, I was able to glue the gondola frame to the deck of the car, centering it based on how many boards from the edge of the car each end of the gondola was. Now, any good gondola needs supports on the outside so the walls don't fall down. While I unfortunately don't have stake pockets to make for maximum realism, I do have the ability to make some quick stakes to brace the sides. Using some HO scale 8 by 8 inch wood strips, or roughly 4 by 4 inch in O, I cut out 10 stakes at roughly 7/8 of an inch each, painted them red, and glued them to the car sides, spacing them out equally by counting the boards in the deck from the bottom. It took a while for the glue to dry, but it was a solid enough connection that I was confident I could do the next step early. And for once, I was correct and I didn't mess up anything that had already been done. However, setting up the handbrake on this car wound up taking me around half an hour to do. It was stupid hard to get to stand upright. We used a titchy brake wheel and some random wire we had laying around to make the handbrake. Between bouts of frustration while trying to set up the handbrake, I decaled both sides of the car. Since I was applying the decals to a simple flat surface, I didn't rip any off for once, and it was a cakewalk to get these all in place. With that, we're on to the final steps, and we're ready to wait, already? Final steps? I know this video is short, but even when I was building this car, it only took me like 5 hours, 4 hours, something like that. It really didn't feel like it was that long. Building this car was a lot of fun. And considering it only took me like 4 hours, I'm thinking about doing a live stream sometime where I just build a flat car on stream. But that's an idea for another time and for another day. For now, all that's left to do is cover the decals in some dull coat to make them a little stronger and glue the frame back in place. Admittedly, I haven't glued the frame back in place at the time that I am recording this script, but I'll do that eventually. Don't look at me, man. And that's it. The car is already finished. I'm proud of how this turned out. I was expecting that building a car from scratch was going to be way harder. And yeah, sure, maybe I should get those stake pockets in place, but this thing looks respectable. This brings our total amount of finished freight cars up to 3, and finished cars in total up to 4. Sooner or later, I'm going to have to start work on that model railroad so I can display these things, or just have a place to store them. But don't worry. I'm already working on that. That's all I've got for you today. Cheers, folks.